Hi, this is Victoria Nalule, and here with me again is Mr. Stephen Dodd. He is a senior lecturer in energy law at the Center for Energy, Petroleum, Mineral and Policy at the University of Dundee. In our previous videos, we discussed about gas contracts, liberalization in the energy sector, and we also talked about renewable energy. In this video, we're going to focus on project finance. But before we start, I'd like Mr. Stephen Dodd to introduce himself again.
Hi, I'm Stephen Dodd. I'm Senior Lecturer in Energy Law at the Centre for Energy, Petroleum, Mineral Law and Policy at the University of Dundee. I've done this for 20 years. I'm not that old. I started very young. And I've taught students from all around the world. I've taught companies and governments from all around the world. And I hope to do it for some time to come.
Thank you very much for the introduction. So in this video, we want to focus on project finance. And the first question is, what are the main features of an energy project finance?
Fundamentally, what project finance does is isolate the sponsor of the project, the parent company, from the project vehicle itself, the actual company which owns the project itself. And what project finance does, what differentiates it from all other forms of financing, is that the bank is paid exclusively from the revenues of the project itself. So the bank doesn't get to go to the parent company if things go wrong. The bank doesn't get to go anywhere other than the actual project itself. So in fundamental terms, if the project fails, the bank loses out. The bank gets burned. The result is, because banks are very conservative things, and they should be very conservative entities, what they do is they make sure that the borrower has structured the finance in a way to minimise the risks to the project. And everything is set up to make sure that the risks are identified, allocated and minimised. Financing is a happy accident. If the bank likes the way the risks are structured in the project, it will lend. If it doesn't, it won't. And that's what differentiates project finance from everything else. In the energy world, what you have to remember is there are wildly different sorts of energy projects. Oil projects, and remember oil is fundamentally about money, oil projects are rarely that difficult to project finance simply because most oil companies have got some money, the oil price is typically significantly more than the cost of production, and so there's money around to do it. In the electricity world, things are very different, and that's why electricity project financing is so studied. Because quite simply, if you understand electricity project finance, everything else looks pretty easy. In the electricity world, none of the companies have got any money, and the entire point of the regulated world is to make sure that the cost of power is as low as possible to consumers. There just isn't any rent in the system if to catch things up if things go wrong. The entire point of it is, let's make sure we identify the risks, allocate them, cost it out so that we know exactly what this project is going to cost over its life and exactly what this project is going to earn over its life. What this tends to mean is that in the energy world, projects are very much contracted in. So they have a long-term contract for maintenance, for operation, and crucially for sale of the product itself. So you want to make sure you have a long-term gas contract, a long-term electricity sales contract, to make sure that you have able to go to the bank and say, look, this is the amount of money I'm going to earn. But the basics of project finance are to make sure that you identify the risks involved and make sure that these are covered. And if they can't be covered inside by the players inside the matrix, by the players directly involved in the project, then it has to be covered from outside, whether by derivatives or by insurance, doesn't really matter.
All right, thank you very much, Stephen Dodd. So the second question is, how is electricity project finance structured, and is it any different for renewable projects?
Electricity project finance, as I said, if you understand electricity project finance and you see how it works, everything else looks straightforward, because remember, you can't store power. You can't sell it later. You have to continuously flow power, and the result is that when you structure the project, all you have to do is identify the risks involved, and you make sure that, for example, in a gas-fired power station, you have an off-take contract which earns you money, and more money than you need to make sure that you pay the interest rate and the capital back on the loan. So you simply make sure the revenues of the project exceed the interest rate and the capital payment by a certain amount, a cover ratio. And the structure is all about making sure that you allocate that risk. If you're in a particularly risky environment, building a new project in a new country which is capacity short, with a government you don't trust and all the rest of it, then you make sure the cover ratios are very high. 5 times. You must earn 5 times your costs in order for the bank to lend to you. but remember that's hard in electricity because the price is regulated. In a country which is less risky, or in a system which is less risky because there is simply, it's bigger. We've been here before, we've seen projects successful before. You might see the cover ratio much lower than that. You will also see things to cover the currency risk. Currency risk is a terrible thing in electricity because all electricity consumers pay for power in their local currency. Almost all costs are in hard currency, dollars. And the result is there's a currency risk as the local currency appreciates and depreciates against the dollar. The bank, remember, is being conservative. It's not worried about appreciation, it's worried about depreciation. So you have to make sure that that kind of risk is covered. You have to make sure that the performance risk is covered, that the plant is actually built and able to perform. If you're building a gas-fired power plant, it has to work at a certain heat rate, a certain amount of gas going in for that amount of power coming out. It's no use if you have to put twice as much gas in to get the same amount of power out, because that's changed your cost base. And again, just every one of those risks has to be analysed. The environmental risk, the change of law risk, the change of regulation, the change of the potential market on the other side, the liberalisation point. If I am selling power on my long-term contract and the government decides to liberalise the market and make me compete, I have a problem. Because suddenly I went to my bank and I said, here's my contract, I'm going to earn this money under the contract for the next 10 years, and the government then says, no, you're not, we have to change things. So each one of those risks has to be identified, allocated and understood, and that's the challenge. When it comes to renewables, the challenge is to make sure that you actually have that income stream being constant. And the result is, well, if you think about it, a wind farm only earns money when the wind blows. If the wind doesn't blow, you don't get any money. If the sun doesn't shine, your solar farm doesn't get any money. And that's the difference between standard electricity project finance and renewable project finance. It's simply making sure that the income stream appears. Now, you can do this by buying deemed power. So for example, I will take or pay, I will buy 1,000 hours a year from you, the wind farm, whether or not the wind blows, I will buy 1,000 hours, I will pay for 1,000 hours. You can do that. You can also do it by simply pooling the wind farm, which gets slightly away from the standard model of project finance. What you do is, instead of lending to one wind farm in one location, the sponsor has 3 wind farms across 3 different locations, and the sponsor says, well, the chances are the wind's going to blow somewhere. So I've got some money, and I will use that to pay for all of the wind farms. And provided the economics work, i.e. you earn enough money from one wind farm to pay the interest on all 3, that will work fine. Now, obviously, that's a fairly silly example, because if we're capping the price, it won't work easily. But the principle's perfectly sound.
All right, thank you very much, Stephen Dow. That marks the end of our last video on project finance. Thank you, Stephen Dow, for your time. And thank you, our viewers. Stay tuned. Do not forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. We shall be bringing you more videos on energy and mining. Stay tuned. Bye-bye.